The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the Weymouth Community Access staff or its board of directors. WCA, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent member-produced public access programming.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to our annual Greater Boston Business and Professional Chapter of the John Birch Society's Christmas Breakfast. That's hard to say. I got to shorten that down a little bit. Okay. Anyway, I want to introduce our speaker, Mr. Sam Blumenfeld. Sam is a homeschool pioneer in the homeschool movement. He's a World War II veteran. He gets around pretty good for his age. In fact, for people who are a lot younger, he still gets around pretty good. I had the honor of bringing Sam to the group that flies veterans down to Washington, D.C. What's it called? The Honor Flight. And my dad was a World War II veteran. I have a special place for that era. And Sam was the most healthiest guy of all those veterans. Some of these poor guys were, on wheelchairs, and Sam was getting under his own steam. So. Anyway, Sam used to be an editor for Crossett and Dunlap in his younger day. Started an organization to expose de Gaulle, President de Gaulle, and also American Friends of Katanga and American Friends of Algeria. And Sam gave me some of those wonderful source documents that was able to put digital format online. He interviewed Moshe Chombey in French. Some years ago. It'd be nice if that interview was available somewhere with subtitles for some of us. Some of you don't speak French fluently. But Sam tells a story where a friend of his asked him to become part of his reading foundation. And Sam says, "Why? What's wrong?" He says, "Because American children aren't learning how to read." This is back in the early 60s. They're not. What's the big deal? It's easy. Phonics. So that was his crusade. He spent most of his life after that working to help people teach their children how to read. The book he did, Alpha Phonics, which he has on the table. My wife and I taught all 5 of our children how to read using that. Very simple. I think it was $15 to $20. Very simple. And Sam would say, you don't need puppets popping out of trash cans to teach people how to read. You don't, believe it or not. Sam has authored numerous books. I think his best book is the NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education. Now, a couple of months ago, I was at a Stop Common Core rally at the Massachusetts State House. And I would say I'm sort of a disciple of Sam Blumenfeld. I'm a Blumenfeldian because I've read almost all of his works. And some of you may know there's a statue of Horace Mann at the State House, as you're facing the left-hand side. And there were some great speakers there, not a big turnout, 50 or 60 people, 3 state reps, including Leah Cole, and Mark Fisher, who was a candidate for governor. And one of the speakers was paying respects to Horace Mann. And I went around telling people that all we're doing is fighting the externalities of what Horace Mann got started. And most of the folks had no idea. And how do I know that? Because of the research that Sam did. So Sam is about to publish his latest book. He's asked me to write a little. He's given me an early version. And there are a lot of people who know the truth, but are afraid to say the truth. And so Sam is not one of those folks. So let's give Sam a really nice big welcome here, a nice applause. And also thanks for pinch hitting on very short notice.
I used to know him when he was 6 feet tall.
And blonde away to here, too.
First, Hal, I want to thank you for that very nice introduction. It's always a tremendous pleasure to address an audience that is willing to know the truth. See, that's one of the problems we have in America. Not only ignorance, but also a complete abhorrence of the truth. And you've got all of these people, you know, who are marching in Ferguson and all over the United States now, all based on lies. All based on lies. These people, most of them are young. They've been to American schools. Many of them had as many as 12 years of education in American schools. And they come out incapable of not only understanding the truth, but having no desire to know the truth.
Oh, wow.
That's the horrible thing. They don't want to know the truth. They simply want to act emotionally on the way they feel. You see, that's the most important thing, is how they feel. Not what they know, but how they feel. And all of that has been inculcated by our school system in America. And, you know, it's interesting that there is really so little curiosity among the elite to find out why we have the situation we do in American education. For example, back in October of 1993, that's a good many years ago. What is that? How many years ago was that? 93 to 2014. The U.S. government revealed that 90 million American adults can barely read or write. 90 million. That was in 1993. And you would have thought that there would have been a real attempt to find out why we have this horrible situation. But the only kind of response we got was from the Secretary of Education, a gentleman from, I think, South Carolina. He said, well, what Americans have to do, they need a tune-up. They ought to go back to school for a tune-up. That's their solution to the problem. Go back to school for a tune-up. They completely ignore what's happened in the past. For example, we all know that 1955, how many of you were around in 1955? Rudolph Flesch wrote a wonderful book entitled Why Johnny Can't Read. And he explained exactly what was happening. He said that the reason why they can't read is because they got rid of phonics and they started teaching children to read by the look-say method. That is, for children to look at each English word as if it were a Chinese symbol. Now, you can't learn to read that way. And so that's why we had 90 million American adults in 1993 who could barely read and write. And of course, that number has gone up. God knows how many today. Especially all of those who have been marching in the streets. They're all functional illiterates. They can't read. If they could read, they'd know the truth, but they're not. And of course, they don't want to admit that they're stupid. But they are. You know, I recently came across a new book about, the title is The Smartest Kids in the World. And it turns out the smartest kids in the world are in South Korea, Finland, and one other country. And she was wondering why Americans can't produce such smart people. I just got the book, so I haven't read it. I just dipped into it, but the first thing I did was look into the bibliography. Where is she getting her information? Do you think my name was in her bibliography? No. Do you think Rudolph Flesch's name would have been there? No. Nobody on our side was in that bibliography. And I looked at the index. She didn't even mention Noah Webster, you know, who's the father of American literacy. As a matter of fact, if you want to know, do you know that America was the most literate nation in the world? until the 20th century when the progressive educators took over and changed the way reading is formed. Here's a primer. This little book made America the most literate nation on earth. This little book here, the primer. And this is Noah Webster's Blueback Speller.
Wow.
This little book, which you could fit in your pocket, made America the most literate nation in the world. And if you go into today's elementary schools and you want to see how they're teaching reading, they've got a pile of books this high, all with beautifully colored pictures. You know, you look at each page, a full page picture, you know, beautifully done, and a couple of words at the bottom. You know, like C-spot run, or C, you know, Jane jump, or whatever. But that's what they're teaching the kids these days, and they're still doing that. Although they're much more sophisticated in how they do this these days, because they've learned that there are those of us in America who do know what's going on. Not many of us, but like you in this room, you see. You are the elite of the knowledge class, I'll put it that way. The elite of the knowledge class because you want to know the truth. You're not afraid of the truth. In fact, you love the truth, just as I do, you see. And that's what motivates us. What motivates us is the desire to know the truth, because we believe in the Bible, and we believe that God wants us to know the truth, and that the father of lies is Satan. You see, Satan is the father of lies, and all of those people who are marching in the streets and demonstrating and lying down and dying in, they have a die-in now, they couldn't care less about the truth. The truth means nothing to them. What they want is power. That's all. They want to be able to shove all of us into a gulag of some kind, because that's what it ends up at. So I decided that after having spent 40 years on this whole problem of not only reading, but of looking at our education system, I decided to put it all together into one book that would finally finish it off. In other words, it would be a kind of my swan song, you know, the accumulation of all my knowledge about what has been going on in the American school system. And the book is entitled Crimes of the Educators. Crimes of the Educators, implying that educators are no better than criminals for what they are doing.
Right. Yeah,
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you the introduction, and that will give you an idea of what this book is about and what it covers. And you'll know what kind of crimes have been committed by the educators. And they're not minor crimes. When you deprive a young person of the ability to use their brain, that's a crime. And that's what they've done to millions of Americans who cannot use their brains. You see, the interesting thing about the reading problem is that you have to understand how the brain works. See, we have two lobes. The left lobe is where we have the faculty of language. This is a gift from God. No other species has that gift. And it is that gift that permits human beings to create civilization. You see, Kant's cats cannot create a cat civilization. They can't even create cat history. You know,
Catastrophe.
that's right. But I mean, but human beings have been given this tremendous gift by God. Why? Because God made us in his, as I said, his own image, like him. And the thing that God wanted to do was to communicate with his great creation, the creation of man. And which is a wonderful thing, that God wants to actually know us, and he wants us to know him. That's why he gave us language. But of course it has other uses. You know, we get to know one another. We get to know the world. God made human beings scientifically minded. You know, in Genesis you read that he brought all the animals in front of Adam and he said, name them. So Adam had to invent all of these names, animal names, you know. And this hippopotamus is a pretty good name that he picked, you know, for that particular creature. But in other words, God told man, you have to observe the world because you're going to take dominion. Now, you can't take dominion if you don't know anything. You've got to be scientific. You've got to have a brain that works, you see, and God gave us that brain. Now, the language faculty is in the left lobe. So what the educators have done, because they're very clever, they said, we will denigrate the word, denigrate language, and we will elevate image. And that's what John Dewey did in his pedagogical creed. He says, image is the means of instruction. Image is the way you learn. And that's why all of those books for the kids have lots of pictures and few words. And so they've shifted the emphasis in teaching reading on not teaching children to read alphabetically with phonics, but of having them use their right brain, the vision brain, the vision part of our brain, that gives us perspective. And as I sum it up, the left brain creates wealth. The right brain spends it. And it's true. Look at it that way. How do they market things today? By throwing pictures at you. That's all you do is see pictures of things that you want or should want, you see. And the word is denigrated. The word is denigrated. But if you notice, the top executives in America, the ones who create wealth, have the largest vocabularies. They are the smartest people in this country because they all learn to read with their left brain. You see. So that's a very important concept which the left, the progressives, understand very well. And certainly Dewey did when he said that you learn from the image, and not from the word. But of course in the Bible, it's the word that counts. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Because how did God create the universe? By the Word. That's so. Let there be. You know, let there be light. Let there be this. Let there be that. And it's the Word that did it. He didn't draw pictures. He didn't get an architect to help him, or an engineer from MIT. No, the Word. And that's why the Word is so important, and the Word has been so denigrated by our education system. And of course that creates functional illiteracy. Now these ideas you will not find in any of the current educational books that are used by teachers. American teachers are the worst educated people in the world. They are so ignorant that it's incredible to believe that people could take the great gifts that God has given them and turn them into not only a disaster, but also into hate, into murder, into mayhem. So let me read what I've written in the introduction. The book, of course, Crimes of the Educators. Progressive utopians are criminals. That's the opening line. Progressive utopians are criminals. They are genocidal psychopaths who have killed more human beings in the last 100 years than any other ideologues in history. They don't limit their murder just to individuals, but to entire nations. As the National Socialist Germany's war of extermination against the Jews, the Soviet Union's war against anti-communists and anyone else who opposed them, Cambodia's slaughter of the educated middle class. Pol Pot said anyone who wears glasses has to be shot. He's taking his glasses off.
We're fine.
But that's because it's a sign that you're educated. You can't be controlled. You've got to be. And he didn't bother with re-education. He said, just get rid of these people. And Communist China's Cultural War did about the same thing. It took the educated class and just drove them into the ground, imprisoned them, and did all of that. Now, in the United States, the socialist utopians adopted a new and unique method of conquering a nation. And make no mistake about it, their aim was to conquer the nation. And they were going to conquer this nation by dumbing down its people, by destroying the brain power of millions of its citizens. The plan to dumb down America was launched in 1898 by socialist John Dewey, and it was outlined in an essay entitled The Primary Education Fetish, which Hal has reprinted, so it's available. You can read that article, that plan to destroy America's constitutional republic. In this article, he showed his fellow progressives how to transform America into a collectivist utopia by taking over the public schools and destroying the literacy of millions of Americans. See, that was the plan. Going to destroy the literacy of millions of Americans, and he knew how to do it by simply changing the way they teach reading. The plan has been so successfully implemented that it is now a fact that half of America's adult population are functionally illiterate. They can't read their nation's Constitution or its Declaration of Independence. They can't even read their high school diplomas.
Wow.
The method of achieving this was by simply changing the way children are taught to read in their schools. The utopians got rid of the traditional intensive phonics method of instruction and imposed a look-say, sight, or whole word method that forces children to read English as if it were Chinese. The method is widely in use in today's public schools, which is why there are so many failing public schools that cannot teach children the basics. this can only be considered a blatant and evil form of child abuse. And this abuse escapes detection because of the cleverness and deception of its perpetrators. In his 1898 essay, Dewey warned his colleagues about being too hasty in carrying out the plan. He wrote, quote, "Change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction," unquote. So if what they were planning was so great, so wonderful, this utopia, why would there be a violent reaction? Well, he knew there would be a violent reaction because Americans were individualists. They loved their freedom. They loved their way of life. And they were not about to give it up for a utopian fantasy. You see, what was the end goal of Dewey and his colleagues? Did they have a set program of how the government would be run? No. They drew their inspiration from a novel written by Edward Bellamy and published in 1888 about America becoming a communist society by the year 2000. And it was done through consensus, not through revolution, but through consensus. Americans would agree that communism was better than a constitutional republic, better than freedom. And that's the point, is that these utopians have fantasies, and they act out their fantasies by murdering millions of people who don't agree with them. You have to go along with the fantasy. Now, and this abuse escapes, as I said, because of their cleverness. In other words, deception would have to be used in order for this long-range, complex plan to be successfully implemented. Educators learned quickly how to deceive trusting parents and taxpayers and how to manipulate politicians. They also knew that the children would be powerless to resist their abuse, and teachers have been taught to blame academic failure on the children, not themselves. Indeed, many of them revel in the idea that they are transforming America to suit their own social fantasies. You see, now, many of the children in the classrooms know something is being done to them that is not healthy. How do they know this? Their brains tell them that something is wrong in this class. And they react. What do their parents tell them? Their parents say, listen to the teachers, behave yourself, and do whatever the teacher tells you to do. But these kids find that they can't. So what do? They act up. They refuse to accept the poison that is being, put into their brains. They refuse to accept it. So they act up, and then they are labeled attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And the only way that can cure these diseases, these conditions, is to drug the little kiddos. Drug them. Ritalin, Adderall. That's how they get these kids to obey their teachers, and then they become zombie-like. They accept whatever the teacher is telling them, and they become well-behaved, functional illiterates. And that's how the schools do it, you see. And so you have millions of children every day who take the pill, given the pill by their teachers to subdue their rebellion, to subdue what Dewey said would happen if, you see, they don't know why they're being dumbed down. All they know is that when they came into school, they felt very intelligent. Remember, kids teach themselves to speak their own language all by themselves without the help of a certified teacher. Isn't that amazing? And so by the time they're ready to go to school, age 5 or 6, they have a speaking vocabulary in the thousands of words. All you have to do is observe little children, and you will see how intelligent they are, natively intelligent. And so they are put into these classrooms where they are dumbed down and where they feel stupid because they can't learn to read. Somehow they feel there's something wrong with themselves. And now we have a whole industry in America that takes care of the, quote, learning disabled, you know. And what they believe is that they were born with a learning disability. Now, a child who can teach himself to speak his own language is very learning able. And they certainly can learn to read with phonics. We didn't have such problems back in the days when they used, you know, intensive phonics, when Noah Webster's works were being used and other educators were using phonics. But today we have this problem. So, of course, most teachers are unaware that they are complicit in this evil conspiracy. And it is a conspiracy. There's not only John Dewey, but you have a whole group of progressive educators who are involved in this plot, in this conspiracy to change America. And they got to work. See, when Dewey said we have to change the way reading is taught in the schools, he said that in 1898. Well, it wasn't until 1930 that the Dick and Jane books were ready to put in the schools. And they worked on these programs, not only to dumb down the teaching of reading, but also the teaching of math and all other subjects. You see, when you dumb down the students, everything else has to be dumbed down. And my solution, of course, is that every child in America should be taught to read with intensive phonics, with the emphasis on the left lobe, on the left brain that creates wealth. So these teachers simply do not do what they were taught to do by their professors of education. Few become aware that their professors deceived them and prepared them to create failure. Few. People like me and other members of the society. There is a small group of us who have known this for many years and have tried to change things, but it's been impossible to move the establishment, which is totally controlled by the progressive utopians. Totally controlled. You can't get a word in edgewise with these people. And they have a lot of money. That's another thing. Our side doesn't have much money or practically no money. But the other side is very wealthy. They get lots of money from foundations. They get lots of money from the taxpayer. Taxpayers are willing to pay for these schools that are dumbing us down. Now, the purpose of my book is to expose the kind of crimes that are being committed every day against American children and the nation in the name of education. Most parents trust the public schools because they are supposed to represent the cherished values of our democratic republic. But the unhappy truth is that today's public schools have rejected the values of the founding fathers and adopted values from 19th century utopian social utopians that completely contradict our own concepts of individual freedom. And they have invented new values under the umbrella of social justice, about which you hear so much from these people lying in the streets, in order to advance society toward their idea of moral perfection. You know, the grand jury in Ferguson, what happened there was a victory over mob rule. You see, that's what the left wants in this country, mob rule. Rule by lies, because that's what you have in all communist countries. You know, it's interesting that we know what the final result of collectivism is. You know, just go to Cuba. They have equality of income in Cuba. Everybody is equally poor. You see, that's what they want. That's equality of income distribution. And the collectivist systems vary. You've got North Korea, you know, which is run by some idiot, and you know, totalitarianism. That's what they want, total control of everyone. And as you notice in America, everywhere you look, there's more and more control of what we do, what we say. I mean, it's still, I'm always amazed that we can still hold meetings like this in America, that they haven't been able to destroy the John Birch Society. They've tried, but they can't lock us up. They're not going to do that, because then, you know, then there would be a real revolution. But this last election, Americans seem to realize what Obama was doing to us. That he was taking us into this utopian you know, into this world of utopian lies. Because that's all they do in the White House now, and is lie. I mean, Obama cannot help but lie. Every time he opens his mouth, it's a lie. Even when he says "and," it's a lie. Even when he says "but," it's a lie. But that's what we're dealing with. And anyway, what are the crimes being perpetrated by the educators against America and its children? The first most serious crime is treason. In April 1983, the National Commission on Excellence in Education said in its final report, quote, his report, A Nation at Risk, quote, if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves, unquote. That's treason, what he's saying. What this report is saying, that our educators are committing treason. They're acting as if an enemy was doing this to us. And of course, it was true, but of course not very many people read the report, The Nation at Risk. And like so many of these reports, they usually wind up in the round file, you know. So you have treason. In other words, our educators are engaged in a deliberate dumbing down of America. They are sabotaging the intellectual growth of our children and depriving Americans of the most productive use of their own lives. I mean, why do you think we have thousands of black youths in the inner cities standing around corners, nothing to do, totally bored, you know, in want of excitement. And how do they get their excitement? By killing each other, you know, or robbing, or using drugs, you see, because they can't read. You know, I was taught to read by phonics back in the days when the schools of New York City still taught children phonics. And once I could read, you couldn't keep me away from the library. I mean, I was always reading something and I was never bored. If you're a good reader, you can never be bored. There's so much out there, you see. But if you can't read, if you can't use your left lobe, and you're stuck with the right lobe, then you're going to seek excitement, emotional excitement, because that's the only way you learn is by emotion. The people with the right, their right brains have been educated or trained. So, the deliberate dumbing down of an entire nation is genocidal in its impact on the nation's culture and intellectual future. No group of educators should have been permitted to impose on American schools a program that is the antithesis of true education. But when deception is practiced on a scale that is beyond public understanding, it becomes a crime as specific as perjury under oath. Standards will not improve education, but cost the taxpayers billions of dollars. You cannot have high standards without high literacy. And high literacy is not a goal of the new curriculum. That's the one thing about the Common Core. High literacy is not its goal. It's as simple as that. And so they can use all kinds of fancy tricks to pretend that they're teaching children to read. But well, all they're doing is just, as I said, pretending. And it's going to cost us an awful lot of money, and of course the kids aren't going to learn anything. As a matter of fact, the tests show that their test scores go down when they're tested on the basis of the Common Core. And the man who invented the Common Core, David Coleman, he is now in charge of the SAT tests. So you can imagine what they're going to be like in the future. As a matter of fact, we've been so badly dumbed down that even the smart are getting dumber in America. The number of kids who achieve the highest scores in the SATs has gone significantly down. So we have fewer kids achieving the highest scores, and at the bottom, we have more kids at the lower levels than ever before. So we have more than enough evidence that this dumbing down process is real and has been going on for quite some time. Now, how do we deal with such criminality? First, you have to make the public aware that it exists, and I hope that this book does that. Then you must make your political leaders aware of what is going on in the schools. Now, that's a tough one, because the educators have been the progressives have been so clever in controlling the politicians. Well, we've got to get some politicians who know what is going on. So I hope that my book gets into the hands at least of conservative Republicans, so that at least they know what's going on. Most political leaders wear blinders when dealing with education. Everybody wants better education. Don't they always use that phrase, improve education? But they have no idea what they're talking about. For example, when it comes to reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, our Washington legislators tinker with its many titles in the hope that somehow education can be improved. But what they fail to understand is what goes on in the schools is based on an agenda that progressive utopians put in place decades ago and have no intention of deviating from. As a matter of fact, the latest reading program to come out of Teachers College, Columbia University, is so bad, so horrible, that but it takes an expert like me to see how bad it is. Because believe it or not, they've put it all on video. So you can actually see how they're doing this in the schools on your video. And remember, Teachers College, Columbia is where all of this started. That's where John Dewey and James McKean Cattell and Edward L. Thorndike, that's where they worked. That's where they planned all of this. Teachers College, Columbia University. So it's the source of the pestilence is right there in New York City, you know. And they're still doing the same thing. And they're trying to get the schools of New York City to adopt the latest version of their image program, where they're teaching the use of the right brain instead of the left brain, imposing the right brain on the to function to perform the functions of the left brain, of course, which it cannot do. Our progressive educational leaders have learned how to deceive parents and the tax-paying public and get away with it. They know that the children are powerless to resist their abuse, and they know how to blame academic failure on the children and not themselves. You know, and as Obama put it, they are fundamentally transforming America to be more in line with their totalitarian views. And he told us what he was going to do. There's no doubt in my mind that Obama is one of these utopians. Mm-hmm. You know, he'd like to be as successful as Fidel Castro or the former leader of Venezuela. These are the people he admires, you know. He doesn't admire our founding fathers. Anyway, all of this required a massive cooperative effort by progressive educators at all levels of the education system to carry out the plan. Of course, there would be debate among them on how best to implement the radical program. For this purpose, they established in 1902 their own private forum, the National Society for the Study of Education, in which they could discuss the various changes in curriculum needed to advance the plan. The Society's yearbooks provide members of the conspiracy, and conspiracy is the right word here because it is secret, immoral, and involves more than one person, with what is being discussed by progressive experts in each area of the school curriculum. Since Dewey and his colleagues were convinced that nobody would believe in the existence of such a conspiracy, they felt free to discuss their plans without fear of discovery by parents. And of course, where do you find these yearbooks? In university libraries. They're not out there in your public library where you might inspect them. You really have to hunt for them. And not every university has a complete collection of their yearbooks. But their yearbooks tell you exactly what they're planning every year. But that, you see, that's the conspiracy gets away with it because how many people are willing to believe that such a conspiracy exists? The minute you use the word conspiracy, you are labeled a nut. You know, oh, you're a conspiracy nut.
Yes.
But It does exist. And as Dewey said, change must come gradually. Because if you go too fast, which is what Obama is doing, he's going so fast that the public is catching on. That's why in this last election they said, hey, we got to stop this. We have to stop it, you see. Suddenly the public is becoming aware. Now, if you notice, nobody calls Obama a communist, but he is one. No question about it, that that's his basic Marxist. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody say that he's not a communist, he's a Marxist. Well, what do they think Marxism is? Communism. Now, we know about the Nation at Risk report. To Dewey, the greatest obstacle to socialism was the private mind that seeks knowledge in order to exercise its own private judgment and intellectual authority. High literacy gave the individual the means to seek knowledge independently. It gave members of society the means to stand on their own 2 feet and think for themselves. This was detrimental to the social spirit, you see. The social spirit needed to bring about a collectivist society. Dewey wrote in Democracy and Education in 1916, quote, when knowledge is regarded as originating and developing within an individual, the ties which bind the mental life of one to that of his fellows are ignored and denied. That was his view, that your mind doesn't belong to you, it belongs to society, you see. And of course, that is not what our minds are, actually. Now, I seem to have so treason is the first crime. The second crime is child abuse, by deliberately inflicting physical harm on a child's brain by using teaching methods designed to produce dyslexia and learning disabilities. And of course, all of this has now been proven by brain scans by scientists who have been working on brain scans. The next, so that's crime 2, child abuse, impairing the brains of children. Treason, impairing the brains of children. A third crime is contributing to the delinquency of minors by teaching pornographic sex education and alternative lifestyles that lead to premarital sex, venereal disease, depression, emotional crises, and unwanted pregnancies. You can see all of these social problems that are created by sex education, by pornographic sex education. A fourth serious crime is destroying a child's belief in biblical religion. A moral and spiritual crime that leads children into atheism, nihilism, secular humanism, and Satanism. School shootings, massacres, arson, teen suicide, student depression, and self-destructive behavior are the results of a school curriculum that denies the existence of God, his loving protection, and life with a purpose. People don't realize how serious this business is of having removed God from the public schools. When I was going to the public schools in New York City in the 1930s, the teacher of the principal read the 23rd Psalm of the Bible at assemblies. And that had quite an influence. It certainly had an influence on me, because when I went into World War II was in the army and was in Italy, that 23rd Psalm resonated. I really felt protected by the Lord. And so that it doesn't take very much to inspire children when it comes to the knowledge of God and how there is a purpose to life and how God loves them. Now you tell children that there is no God, that's a horrible thing. And look what it leads to. School shootings, massacres. Can you imagine schools with massacres? That's what we have in America today. Teen suicide. There was no such thing as teen suicide when I was growing up. Why would an American child born in the greatest country in the world, with all of our wonderful, advantages, especially today where you have Big Macs and Disney World and BMWs. I mean, why would any child commit suicide today? Can American life become so horrible that they prefer death to life? Well, there's such a thing that they teach in the schools called death education. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but they actually have kids write their own obituaries, and visit cemeteries. And what they do is tell them, death is not so bad. As a matter of fact, it might be better than life. Which is why you have many high achievers committing suicide. Not the dumbed down black kids in the community, they just kill each other. They don't commit suicide.
More fun.
It's only the white high achievers who commit suicide, because school has become so unbearable. School has made life unbearable for them. And of course their parents, are pushing them to get into Yale and Harvard and all of these so that they can achieve success. And then they'll be happy. But the interesting thing is, there's a blog, I came across a blog the other day by a young homeschooler, a 16-year-old, very attractive young lady with beautiful long blonde hair, the kind that so many of them have these days. And she was telling her fellow teenagers how wonderful it is to be homeschooled. And she said, I am happy every day. I don't have to wait until I graduate and get married and have kids to be happy. I'm happy now.
Right.
Which is interesting. So she's not going to commit suicide. She's happy. But that's what's been going on. And of course, the fifth crime is pushing psychiatric drugs on the kids. Millions of kids are taking these drugs. That's a crime, to force kids to take psychiatric drugs. And the last crime is extortion. That is getting money out of the taxpayer by deception, by telling the taxpayer, oh, we're going to improve education, just give us a couple of $1 billion more. And of course, it never improves. All they do with that money is buy more educational malpractice. That's all. Well, anyway, I hope you will buy my book and spread it around, get the message out, because it's up to people like yourselves who know the truth, whom neighbors tend to respect and to trust, where you can actually tell them how bad things are and how they can protect their children, because that's the aim of all of this, is to protect American children, to give them what they really deserve is a true education. And as far as the curriculum is concerned, go to every single elementary and primary school in America and tell them to teach children to read with intensive systematic phonics. they will be able to use the left lobe, the language part of their brains, the logical part of their brains. And that will produce among them the desire to know the truth. Thank you very much.